And right now we are live with Radio Free Transarctica, where I have my good friend Sean ATma, who is our one of our resident expert guys on many different topics on our Discord. Welcome, Sean, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks.
I am just right now posting this that on our Discord, so everyone knows that we are live, and to Facebook and to Twitter. There's always some work
With yeah.
to get all this stuff done. All right, I have the Gnostic, or I have the Nag Hammadi library, the Gnostic Society library version of the Gospel of Thomas on gnosis.org pulled up and on stream, so people should be able to see this text. Also, the link is in the description, so people can find it. But just before we begin, I always like to begin or end things with just little pieces of musical prayer to kind of invite the Spirit into our discussions. Our topic tonight is the Nag Hammadi. Well, it's part of the Nag Hammadi library, but the Gospel of Thomas is actually one of the oldest of the gospel literature, and it comprises 114 verses of direct quotes attributed directly to Jesus, supposedly Jesus in conversation with his disciples, and this has been treated to greater or lesser degrees of legitimacy through history. It was not chosen as one of the canonical gospels in the Bible, the three synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and the Johannine Gospel of John. But it is perhaps in ranking next to them, probably the next most legitimate in most Christians' eyes, and in my eyes, it's a little bit of a shame that it wasn't included, but I can see why. It is kind of a manifestation of a secret teachings. Yesterday on my Secret Teachings of All Ages lecture, I was discussing the differences between esoteric religion and exoteric religion, and in this case, exoteric religions tend to be the outward form of a religion in a time, and an esoteric religion is a more mystical school that ends up being an inner core. Jesus was certainly an esoteric teacher as well as an exoteric teacher, and so the Gospel of Thomas represents a core bit of the esoteric teachings. So what ATma and I have discussed about doing tonight is trying to actually just engage with this text in and reading it. It is 114 verses, so it's probably going to become an ongoing series. But we're going to spend an hour or two going over as much of it as we can. And so thank you for joining me. Let's see. And are you ready to begin, Sean? I'm not. We were having a little bit of technical difficulty with the voice chat earlier, and it appears I'm not really able to hear you right now. It was working intermittently, or it was working, but I don't know what state it is in now. Maybe I will. I'm going to go ahead and try to call you on directly on a private call. Can you hear me, ATma?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you as well. Okay, that's good. So, welcome to the show tonight, and thank you for joining us and speaking to us about the Gospel of Thomas, which I know you're very passionate about, and I am also, as one of the great texts of the Christian tradition.
Yes, I'm actually going to be using two translations a little bit when I'm reading it,
Yeah.
because kind of, it's funny about the translations, because all the translations that exist today are translations of translations of translations. And even then, it's still not as though we were there with Jesus at physically, like we were Thomas himself.
Right.
So 114 verses, he must have said a million things, but it's cut down to 114 here. I can understand why it's not in the gospel, because it's not exactly in a very friendly, digestible content. The others are stories,
Right.
written accounts of stories. This one is like, I'm not sure exactly if there's an order to it, but there does seem to kind of be an order to the sayings, a little bit of it. It has some content at the top, and then some content in the middle, and then some at the bottom. But the first one, it's funny because when a person, the first one here, I'll read off the Lambda translation. It says, "Whoever finds the interpretations of these sayings will not experience death." Now, the other one says, "Whoever discovers the interpretations of these sayings will not taste death."
That is true.
So, all experiences are acquired, all tastes are acquired. Just in that one single bit of sentence, because you can rely on it to, at a minimum, be a 100% completely true statement, word for word, a true statement. If you're looking for something, you're going to find it, right?
That is true. This is also what I would say about the ordering of this text is that I believe it to be put into an order that would parallel a prescriptive esoteric practice of introspection and meditation. So you could see it as like when the Zen Buddhists would give a koan or a kind of a meditation puzzle for someone to meditate on. Each one of these passages is in its own way a kind of a bit of a puzzle to interpret and unlock. And as you said, the only existing copies we have are written in Coptic and Greek, and perhaps it was originally written in Aramaic or Hebrew. Or Didymus Judas Thomas, the apostle, may have had Greek as his native language, but it is not really it's really impossible for us to tell what degree of text we have. We certainly know that we don't have the original, but we do know that we have. There's very early copies, but they, as you were saying, with translations like this, it's always good to use comparative translation to try to figure out if there's hidden meanings, linguistic meanings in the words. And I know that you are someone who favors a bit of a etymological breaking down of meaning, or you like to look into the deep symbolic meaning of different words.
Atomize.
Yeah, and kind of and atomize the meanings. And in that context, just because of the fineness which we may be using to look at this, it will probably turn into a series. So we're just seeing today how much we can get through. But for this beginning one, the very first lines of this translation that I'm looking at, it says, the first non-numbered verse is, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded." So this is claimed to have been, first of all, an esoteric teaching that the living person, Jesus Christ, spoke to Didymus Judas Thomas. Didymus means twin and is actually a translation of the name Thomas, which also means twin. Didymus Judas Thomas was the Apostle Thomas, the famous doubting apostle. The very first line that you were just mentioning, and he said, "Whoever discovers the interpretation of this saying will not taste of death," immediately reminds me of the saying of the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:51, where he says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." And I believe that the aim of many of these Gnostic Christians in the early times was precisely this not tasting of death, because they would wake up to a spiritual life that would transform them completely. Can you tell some of your thoughts about this first verse?
Is death something that you can acquire a taste for?
Well, that's a good. I mean, I suppose
people seem to chase after the idea of it because it's just because it's a mystery. It's just because it's a mystery.
That is
that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that death is a bit of a mystery. I usually use my opinion, or my opinion on death is that it's a bit of an illusion. It's not something that is a actual thing. So in my opinion, I'm not even sure that it's possible to taste death. But when we say that you taste something or experience something, I think that going through the change, or death is symbolic of the process of change in all things, of moving from one state to another. So your current self can die each moment and be reborn in each moment as you move from the person that you were to the person that you are, and this person will pass away in a certain sense as you move into the future. What is your interpretation of the meaning of taste? Are we running into... I am not able to hear you, but I do see that it says that you are transmitting.
Is it better now?
Yes, it's much better now. Thank you.
Okay, I said, in terms of, like, death and what happens with that, if they say meditation is like preparation for death, but meditation is the only time where you're trying to receive like the purest possible information. You know, the purest possible information is supposed to basically be, the whole purpose of meditation is, what do I do next? Whether that is, do I empty my mind next? And then 1 second later, the brain is still polling, every second in sync What should I do next? What about next? What do I do now? You know, and it can kind of be just breathing, where you don't even pull anymore. You're just there. But at some point, eventually, you're not gonna just be turned into a rock. I mean, unless you're really sure you want to do that. But most likely, you're gonna walk somewhere else. So an extreme version of this would be that in the death state, you could say that it's the Satan's temptation. You're shown all the kingdoms, everything that you could go to, you know. And of course, there's nothing necessarily evil about that, because if your family loved you, they would want you to want to stay with them, and not feel trapped or constricted in any kind of way. So you're presented with, here's everything you could ever want, and you say, nah, this is good right now. This is good. This is fine. And so in that case, you never ended up experiencing or tasting, that death, which is really like, let's say you take that temptation on, you say, all right, let me go to everything, everywhere. Okay, now you're like a puff of smoke at a quantum level. You practically don't exist. You're going to eventually, though, through an infinite amount of time, if it takes it, you're going to eventually settle somewhere, and it's like death. You stop moving. There's no more activity left. The fuel, the desire you obtained, right, by being singular, ran out like oil in a lamp. And so there's no more desire left. It's basically like getting old, except in a higher spiritual level. And that's where cycle happens, because the person's functions essentially stop. And let's say in the death state, they have that freedom, and instead of resting ever, they're just awake forever, always. And that's fine. But at the same time, if you're not around family, if you're not around people, what are you doing? You're like an insect. But even the insects have family, even the insects stop and go. So that's where the death thing happens. And it becomes a thing where it's not exactly a horrible negative thing. It's like one man's trash is another's treasure. It's like you cycle through, but you're not lost. Like with Buddhism, you're not lost. You're still hanging around. You're just going to cycle through, and maybe when you come out of it all, if you want to, you can remember all the experience of that. You're probably not going to, though. It's like junk data. It's in the past. Let it go. Move on. What's going on today?
Well, I definitely think that when we talk about this thing, especially with regard to certain ideas of Buddhism and reincarnation, what I think is meant by if you discover the meaning of these sayings, you won't taste death, is that what we think of as being death is kind of an illusion state. There's no actual end to anything. We know from physics that energy and matter are neither created nor destroyed, and they simply change forms in endless ways. And so in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, they use the word bardo to describe intermediate states. And everything is seen as being a kind of intermediate state. So, for example, the book of dying is called the Bardo Total in Tibetan, and that means the bardo of it is the bardo of death, or hearing the bardo of death. And so this book is read to people as they're dying, so that as they're losing this physical body, so that they can come to terms with the process that's happening to them. But I would like people to realize, and what I think that Jesus is impressing on people in many ways, is that when we have a very limited way of thinking about life and death. And when your physical body stops functioning, it stops functioning as a machine unit in the way that we comprehend physical body functioning. But it doesn't stop, and it never ends. It transitions from one kind of life into another kind of life. And so the majority of cells in a human body are actually not human cells, but are various kinds of bacteria, or various flora and fauna of the body biome. And so when the human being dies in the sense that we consider recognizable, they stop functioning on the human level in our normal way. They actually go through a process of blooming, where this biome that exists within them, this blooms. And so they are not actually dying. People move only from one state of life, one intermediate bardo, to another kind of intermediate bardo. They're moving in a cycle of states where none of those states is actually a final state or a terminal state. It is simply another state of change, another state of a change in life. And so one form of energy is simply transformed into other forms of energy. Buddha actually spoke about this a lot when he would talk about the meaning of rebirth, which he famously gave an example of rebirth as being as if your soul was like a flame on a candle, and it burns down this candle. The candle's like the physical body, which has a certain amount of fuel, and when it goes to the end, you use that candle to light another candle. The flame moves from one to the other, and the first, when its fuel is gone, the flame is extinguished. But the burning flame on the second candle, Buddha posed the question, is this the same flame or a different flame? And that's a very puzzling paradox, because it has the same origin, and it may not be connected to the same fuel source or the same causes and conditions anymore, but it certainly received its existence from those causes and conditions. And so the substance of the flame can in many ways be said to be of the same perfect or principle or ideal substance. And in that sense, when someone is reading through the teachings of Jesus Christ and what he taught, I believe that his teaching of resurrection was one form of this kind of teaching, that death is really what we think of as death, where the body stops and it functioning in its normal ways, is not actually a real ending of any kind, or a real not a real death in a certain sense.
That's absolutely true. On the other hand, even if we could just do that, would it be a good idea to? I mean, wouldn't people kind of be like, whoa, 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 hold on, man, what are you doing? You're supposed to be not here anymore. We had an agreement. I saw you go. That means you go. You know, that's kind of how a lot of people treat it. As you said, they have a limited view. It's binary. You're here or you're not here. Mm-hmm. You're alive or you're dead. You're here or you're not here. I'm seeing you or I'm not seeing you. If I'm not seeing you more, well, I mean, I'm never going to see you again. You're dead. That's it. You're gone. Whatever. I'm not going to think about you at all. You're the dead. Buried. Gone. And of course, people bury people on the earth because it represents that they're basically being like the earth. And what do we do with the earth? We walk on it. We do whatever we want with it. It's the earth, you know? Do whatever you want.
Well, I almost think about when someone is buried into the earth, that is, in a sense, giving their body back to its original source. And it is then dissolved back into the same system in which it came from. Some people view cremation, for example. The Vikings, a famous Islamic scholar once saw the Viking funeral of a king of the Rus. I believe his name was Bin Fushad, and he saw this death of the Viking king of the Rus, who was, of course, his body was burnt in a boat with some of his one of his concubines killed herself and placed her body over there, or was killed by a priestess. And so it was a very old-fashioned kind of thing. But one of the Vikings remarked to this Islamic scholar that you Muslims do not have. He said, "You Muslims do not have respect for your dead because you bury them in the ground as if discarding them. But we Vikings, we burn them so that someone's essence becomes dissolved and they become one with the universe on the spot." But then the Islamic scholar's response is that, well, we don't burn them so that their life returns to the earth, and their body returns to the living things of the earth, though they're the things that gave rise to their life in the beginning.
I think it probably doesn't, besides like, mutilating and something weird, it probably doesn't really matter what happens when, the person passes, what they do with that, besides at least doing something. Because let's ask the dead person, let's go contact them in the afterlife. Let's just theoretically assume we could do it like magic. Now this person in the afterlife, they're in a separate time bubble in heaven, right? So they've already experienced like a million years of progress. They've already had more than enough time to decide what they want to do, with the dead body.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, oh, whatever. Whatever you want, I don't care. So, or at least that's how I'm assuming that they would. If they had enough progress, they'd be like, oh, I mean, it's gonna go somewhere, right? Okay, then it's gonna be recycled either way. It's fine. It's like, the Mother Nature assumption is gonna get recycled.
Right. I mean, it's whether you burn it or you bury it. I mean, that's the truth, is that it doesn't, nothing is ever created or destroyed. Energy is not created or destroyed, and matter is not created or destroyed. It just changes forms. And so it's just...
I think it's actually, I think it's amazing that there are different options, and they're basically all equal and valid. It's that whole creativity thing. It's basically representative of why we have 7 colors, or,
Yeah, I think that definitely there's reasons for the element of choice. People's traditions with regarding to funerary practices are very personal and have to do with the ways that their family feels, and that their particular religious group feels about burial, or about cremation, or about things of that nature. But I think that the important thing, these are esoteric teachings in this book. I mean, they have exoteric meanings as well, but I think that when we're talking about this, whoever discovers the interpretations of this saying will not taste death is a promise that these teachings are those that destroy in one's mind the illusion of death, or the illusionary belief that death represents an end or a final state, rather than being a movement from, for example, as people say, a movement from a physical temporary existence. It can be catapulted into a eternal existence, or one where one is elevated to a spiritual body that is higher, or somehow of a higher vibration than the physical matter body that we possess at this point. But Pythagoras said, and I mentioned in my talk yesterday about the school life and philosophy of Pythagoras, was that everyone's soul is like a seal, or like a stamp, and when you enter into this world through the mother's womb, God almost impresses upon matter, like wax, this seal or stamp. And so the seal and stamp itself is of a perfect form that is eternal. And the thing that it has stamped can almost be seen as a kind of a temporary clone, or a spacesuit, or a vehicle that is only a temporary thing that exists as long as its fuel lasts. But the eternal being, it never ends, and can be used to infinitely stamp new balls of wax, if that is what is wanted, if that's the thing that you want to do. But it also has existences that are beyond any use in terms of wax. You can a seal is not necessarily used to create a ball of wax and push it into a physical mold, but could also be used as a model or a principle, or have an existence of its own self in various ways.
I think that it's funny because it does say whoever finds the interpretation. So, there is a single solitary here's what I meant. Here's exactly what I meant when I wrote this. Surely, even with translation, there's going to be enough context. You know, you can basically fill in all the blanks with enough context. You know, surely there's going to be enough here that I can like, you know, figure it out. And the funny thing is that it's like an inside joke. Once before you understand that first line of text fully, you're like, you got to be joking. After you understand the line of text, he's not joking, but it's still funny.
Yeah.
You know, because that has to do with a bit of the translation aspect. Because you're like, right, because technically speaking, you know, what it's not necessarily about if you're going to keep existing. That's not what most people see as death, even at an unconscious level. They see some kind of, there's existence. They're not going to comprehend it. It might be an insect level intelligence of existence, but, you know, they still like in the background. Because if people really consciously thought, I'm not going to exist anymore, I don't know. That's like a thing where no one thinks that, you know, even no one consciously does that. But I think that with these sayings, it also has to do with, you know, what you consider to be your life, you know, what you consider other people are telling you is going to go away or something. I've read theories online about when you die, there's no attachment, everything's gone. And I'm like, well, I mean, what's the sense of anything? Like literally, what's the point of anything? It would kind of paint all of existence as some kind of ludicrous, oh, hey, you're in heaven. Why don't you go do a bunch of chaotic stuff and experience time? Also, just forget it right afterwards forever. It didn't even happen. What the hell? What does that do? That doesn't even make any sense. So some people posting theories, it's just if you try to make a full circle of logic, you know, considering all of eternal reality, it doesn't make sense.
Well,
But you know, if you want to keep what you find, you need a cup.
that is, in a certain sense, true. I think that my point of view and the point of view that I would say is informed by the theology of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that there is an eternal self. There's a spiritual self that is pre-existent. Essentially, everyone exists in eternity. In some context, within the mind of God as a seed that then becomes larger and larger as it grows in what you could say is the vineyard of God. And as the person grows, they gain different manifestations. And in this physical world, I believe that the purpose of this physical world is a kind of school or academy. And in the sense of manifesting here, part of the purpose of us manifesting here requires us to go through a process of forgetting. But in the future, in what you will become after having been a human and succeeded at human trials and problems, you will attain what Jesus called the kingdom of God. And in that kingdom, you will not forget anymore. Your knowledge will be restored to you, and then you will have the benefit of all of these previous lives in whatever forms they took. That way you become a greater being. And the teaching of Joseph Smith was such that beings become eternally greater. They become greater more and more and more and more. And because the purpose of God's creation of all of his children, as it is written in Psalms 82:6, know ye not that ye are children of God, or that know ye not that ye are gods, that you are Elohim, and that each one of you is a child of the Most High, which is El Elyon. And that is saying, when it's said that we're created in God's image, a person grows and becomes like their parents. A physical human being grows and becomes much like their parents. But their parents don't stop being older than them or stop being their parents just because the child eventually becomes a father or a mother in their own right. They then the parent, the original parent or the parent of the child was then becomes a grandparent. So you can become, the goal is to become like Christ or like God by following their examples, following their examples and their teachings of wisdom, and using them as a model by which to improve the self. And in so doing, you will become a greater being that then is not subject to the same forces of forgetfulness or dissipation that you are once subject to as a physical being on this plane. And so my belief is that it's not an eternal process of forgetting again and again and again, though that happens for a long time, but it's a process of Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill again and again and again, but every time he becomes stronger until eventually he actually does succeed, given an infinite time period. Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, though it seems he fails over and over and over again, every time he rolls the boulder up the hill, he becomes a stronger person and becomes more capable of his next attempt. And eventually, given an infinite timeline, Sisyphus will succeed and will push the boulder all the way up the hill. And once he's done so, the boulder's at the top of the hill, and his purpose in doing that has succeeded. And I believe that is the process of life and rebirth, is the process of eternally improving until you reach a state where death is no longer really a setback. And in that sense, this guidance in this Gospel of Thomas is guidance that is aimed at destroying death or conquering death as a setback. And if you discover the secret meanings and the interpretations of the sayings of the Gospel of Thomas, then you will have achieved what Jesus taught, which was the doctrine of eternal life, that life is not actually something that ends, but is something that continues forever. And in doing so, you will have attained the anastasia, or the resurrection.
Captain Cornhole, asked about if someone discovers the interpretation, will they be able to cross the death barrier without attachment to sensory experience of death? Or he also asked, is taste the sensory experience of death? And it's interesting because let's say you know how a lot of animals function only based on their pleasures they get? Mm-hmm. And you know what F's up an animal, like super F's them up? If you take them out of the wild and let's say you give them like pure sugar and you let them live on that, like just straight up, they probably would, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Oh gosh, or Mouse Utopia, you give them the endless food. Their whole experience was like a transient thing that's also permanent by, showing of the fact that their whole thing just falls apart right away. With taste, it's interesting because let's say you die, and because you are rebellious, you don't have much attachment to your family, so you enter into a temporary area normally called purgatory, which is like a waiting station. You said earlier that there's not termination. There's none, but there are like resting points. You know what I mean? And that's for everyone's good. That's for your good, so that you don't run out into the multiverse and just basically poof, you're gone. And at the end of it, you'd be upset because you'd be like, oh man, why wasn't someone, keeping me from doing this even though I wanted to do this? It's one of those stupid, like, little kid, oh my gosh, you said you wanted, oh my, it's infuriating. The best solution is silently making a wall, and they can't go out of there right away without proper reason. Right. And they're upset at first, but eventually, it's just normal what we see in this reality.
Well, it's
kid
like
growing up.
Put them in a playpen, like kids are put into a playpen or a safe area, a play area where they're safe. And so things are padded, and there's not sharp objects and things like that because they don't understand them yet. And
exactly. Do you know how there are certain mental disorders which distort your senses, like make it so that you taste what you smell or something like that?
Yeah,
and that can have bad effects. That can now that has to do with the person's consciousness. You know how people that kind of thing can happen if they take like psychedelic things.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with this a bit in terms of when you pass? You know, if you're very, very rebellious and you basically leave no choice for the spirits to basically let you have a taste of death. You see how it doesn't say you're going to die if you don't interpret it, the settings, the sayings. The wording, you have to be like precise, like a surgeon looking at it. It doesn't say you're gonna die. They say you will not taste death. You will not experience death. Now, a lot of people, when they read these texts, their primary assumption is death is a permanent state they're going to experience if they don't interpret the text.
Let
Right?
me.
Think about that. That's projection because they don't understand the text yet.
Yeah. Well, in some of these things, for example, when I was referencing this to 1 Corinthians 15:51, the this saying of the Apostle Paul is this exact same teaching in a different form. Gospel Thomas is a very concentrated teaching, but it is reflected throughout the rest of the New Testament, and so that's why I consider it personally to be a genuine addition to the New Testament that we probably should include in our own personal canon. In this sense, 1 Corinthians 15:51 says, "Behold, I show unto you a mystery, that we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For that trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, which giveth us victory through the Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be ye steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." Basically, Paul is saying here that everyone is going to go through the process of death. Everyone shall not necessarily sleep, but everyone will be changed. And so, in this sense, I do think that taste death is saying something about the sensory experience of death. And I've often wondered, though I don't know this for sure, sometimes I think that we must go through the experience of death and experience it in a very intimate way as part of the initiation process into what comes afterward. But at the same time,
Bingo.
I think that God is very merciful. Is one of the sayings that is constantly appears, and one of the ways in which mercy is manifest is that sometimes experiences are really scary, but end up being a lot easier than you think that they're going to be. And in this case, I think that death is not a difficult thing. Everyone has to go through the process, and its difficulty depends on. It says here, like, the sting of death is sin. In Greek, sin doesn't mean evilness or like whipping yourself on the back. It's the word hamartia, which means, as in archery, to miss the mark or to miss the target. And in that sense, it's saying that suboptimal actions and suboptimal beliefs will yield a more painful process of dying. But if you have lived a good life and done good things, your process or the amount of work that you have to do in dying and the amount of pain that you have to go through in letting things go is reduced. And to the point where if you understand the interpretations of all these things, then it will be a painless process. You won't actually experience something negative. And thus it is said that the sting of death is swallowed up in victory. That is what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15. So in this, actually, I think that in this sense, the Gospel of Thomas is a self-initiating document that does a lot of the work for the reader. And in this context, the second saying actually is very relevant. Jesus said, "Those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. When they find, they will be disturbed. When they are disturbed, they will marvel and will reign over all." And a parenthetical saying in this particular translation says, "And after they have reigned, they will rest." I don't know what that parenthetical statement is from, if it's from only certain copies, but this idea is that everyone is someone who is seeking, whether they know it or not. And so those who seek should not stop seeking until they find, meaning that they should not stop seeking the meaning of these sayings until they discover what the true meaning is. And even if they believe they have discovered a meaning, it is worthwhile to consider that it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to grasp the full mind of God in any subject. And so you should not stop seeking anything until you find the solution. And I think that in that case, it is in some sense an eternal process of seeking and finding. But then when it says that when someone finds, they will be disturbed, I believe that means it will be as though they have been viewing the universe upside down and inside out until that point. Everything that they believe will be kind of turned on its head, and then when they are disturbed, they will marvel at that new reality and realize their power and their true self and their true being, and in that sense, they will reign over all. What are your thoughts? I don't know if we're having more difficulties with our audio or what. Are you still there with me? Okay. I'm going to, he said just a moment, I think he's having some technical difficulties. So I'm just going to, some of the, I really am a big fan of this book, and because, excuse me, because it has so many wonderful meanings. And in this next passage, in the third verse, Jesus said, "If your leaders say to you, 'Look, the Father's kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds will precede you there. And if they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. And rather, the Father's kingdom is within you, and it is outside of you. And when you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are that poverty." In the context of this, there is the saying, another saying from the canonical Gospels, where Jesus says, "The kingdom of God is within you," or "the kingdom of God is in your midst." In Luke 17:21, Jesus says, in the King James edition, he is saying, I'm just trying to, I'll use Young's literal translation. "Nor shall they say, 'Lo here,' or 'Lo there,' for lo, the reign or kingdom of God is within you." So you shouldn't say, "Look over there, that's where it is," or "Look over here, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you." So this Luke 17:21 is kind of a section of this Gospel of Thomas, verse 3, which is a very important teaching that the kingdom, the Father's kingdom, is within you and outside of you, and in that sense, it reflects the Hermetic principle of the of as above, so below, the reflection of the microcosm of the macrocosm. And in this sense, you can say that man is created in God's image, male and female was he created. So the spiritual nature of human beings is to mirror that of God. And in that sense, God is both male and female, and humans are both male and female, mirroring God as a microcosm. Welcome back, ATma. Are you back here with us? I see that you were talking. You're still not coming through. I'm definitely not sure what is causing this intermittent audio issue on your side. I just tried restarting the Discord call.
How about now?
Okay, that's better. Okay, so I was just going through verses 2 and 3 to kind of to expand on what is being said in verse 1.
For verse 2, there's it's funny because oftentimes there's two ways to read these things. And there's another thing that says, he who has 2 ears better listen.
Yeah.
I think that's the way that how we have 2 eyes, we use depth. So if we have 2 ears, then no matter what language something's in, we'll be able to listen to, because we're looking at it from, okay, what are they saying? And we're also saying, what am I hearing? And then you can triangulate that. It's pretty cool, actually. You can triangulate language, even if the person's speaking something different, because you know what you understand, and you know that they can't be interacting with you if they're not in the same place you are. So you know there's relativity. But for the first one, no one goes out of their house to look for something and then goes back in 2 seconds later, and then just gives up and doesn't find it. So you're just going to take your time. You find it, and oftentimes when you find something, if it's something you had to look for, you're gonna have to dig for it. You're gonna be troubled. Now, you were right about what you were saying with that. When I look at the rule over the all part, I kind of see that as you'll see it all, because I think that some of the translations have a bit of a assumption, right? And it's true that you'll rule over the all in the same way that, it's like you're awakening to your higher level body, which is like a myriad of infinite everything. And it's not in a negative way. It's like a systematic way, like angels attending, helping you at every step. I think that it's the way people, I think that's one of the reasons why they didn't include this gospel, is because of stuff like that. It said rule over the all. And to some people that are a bit sensitive, they're going to see that and they say, oh, wow, that sounds kind of like mean or tough, or like as though if someone discovers the meaning of this, they're going to go rule the world, Right. So there's like, and of course, if you see everything, you're going to be able to reposition.
That's also definitely one of the things that pops up with for example, it's one of the things that is often used as a criticism of Latter-day Saints, is that Joseph Smith basically said that people can become like God, or this is an idea that's in Greek Orthodoxy or Eastern Orthodoxy as well, which is theosis, that people can become one with God or like God in a real way, in a very real way, becoming like Christ, or becoming one of the members of the body of Christ. And in that sense, it is referring to kind of this idea of becoming, of achieving something that's potential in you. But a lot of people see this and think that it somehow reduces the uniqueness of God, which in my opinion it does not. And it is not a blasphemous statement to say that human beings are children of God because we are created by God, even though we're not literal children in the sense of a father and mother have sexual intercourse to create a physical human body. God is your creator or your origin, and as such, he is like the great grandfather, the very origin of all of your line. If you go all the way back to Adam, then the person who created Adam is God. This is the biblical interpretation, and thus you can say that Adam's father was God, and so your grandfather, with a very many number of greats, is God. And in that context, I think that people did get very sensitive about it as a blasphemous statement to say, "Ye are gods." And in fact, the Pharisees persecuted Jesus for saying, "Ye are gods." He quoted that to the Pharisees. He said, "Know ye not that your scriptures say, ye are gods," quoting Psalms 82:6. I see that. I don't know what is going on with your audio on your side. If you have a push to talk button, maybe you need to turn it on to automatic, or I'm not certain what is causing our technical difficulties today.
Is that any better?
Yeah. Is it me rejoining that's making it work, or is it something that you're doing on your end?
I don't know. It might be connection or something, but
It's very strange.
But with these, it's interesting because the occult meaning, I think, of seeking is, well, enlightenment, basically. You're trying to seek what's going on in the world. You're trying to seek what the heck's going on. Think of, just to, as a reminder topic, just, I guess, to jump it for you to say something on. What the heck is going on? That's a pretty good question. A lot of people, ever since the day they're born on this earth, especially if they're connected to the internet, what the heck is going on? That's
Yeah.
just pretty much like a daily thought process in the whole world, every day on the news. What's going on? What the F is going on? Like every day, every second, And so it's like, okay, let's find out. Let's go seek. So now it's troubling. Oh my gosh, I found, holy cow, you are not going to believe what the heck I found, Lex, studying this text. You will not believe it. Okay. You won't believe it. And then it's like, oh my gosh, this is like, what the heck? This is so troubling. This is so big and chaotic. And in reality, chaos is actually only chaos to the reader. Chaos is actually like incredibly sophisticated order that's incomprehensible. So then you're astonished, but it's because it says when you become troubled, you'll be astonished. So it says you will be. So it's not that you're instantly going to be astonished. It says you will be astonished. The previous one says when he finds he will become troubled. It doesn't say he will be troubled, or maybe that could be grammar, but it sort of shows that there's a bit of like a bit of a timeline there. And you're going to be astonished, and then because of the astonishment, you'll be able to see it all because of lack of hating and judging and seeing things as troubling you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's say you first discover that people can die and it troubles you. Mm-hmm. And then you learn the truth, and then you're astonished, and you're not going to become troubled anymore over that. You're just not going to be troubled. I think that that's a natural process. Anything new, it's like the dark, the cats, that they see like a cucumber on the floor, they freak the hell out. They don't even give themselves enough time to physically verify what they're looking at. They don't have the time. They shortcut the reaction time in their brain, and they jump. I don't know if you've ever seen that before. If you put a cucumber like right behind a cat and they turn around, they're like, oh, no.
I've never tried
They're
that.
gone.
But I do have a cat, so I guess I could try it. I don't want to scare her though. So
No, that would probably, you would be awakening an absolutely ancient amount of instinct that somehow that cat relaxing in your house somehow is still on guard at all times, technically, for the possibility, and you wonder why it's looking around your house all the time. At all times, it's just looking everywhere, and it's kind of funny. It looks like it's like human beings. They're just in a big chaotic mess, and they become more conscious, kind of because their natural instincts are thrown into a clean box environment, and it sort of acts like a mirror. Right, single objects in the universe are like mirrors, and it reverberates, and so they kind of learn about themselves, learn about the world, with that endless progression and all that.
yes, absolutely. And I think that definitely with the translations of the Gospel of Thomas, it is my preference would probably be to go back and dissect it in Greek, but it's difficult. I haven't done this on my own yet because I still am working on my knowledge of the Greek New Testament. But when there's certain kinds of semantic arguments that can be made about the translation, I tend to try to avoid ones that rely on a particular translation's distinct wording. But clearly they have clearly Jesus is showing a chain of events in saying this, that you've already begun the process of seeking, and you should not stop until you finish that process. But when you discover the end, it will be something that is astonishing or disturbing, or it turns your understanding upside down, or is very very profound experience. And when you are astonished or disturbed, it will bring about a marvelous feeling of wonder, and that will be the understanding that you kind of are realizing your own divine nature, and in that sense you become a king, or a king and high priest in the house of Israel. You attain the illumination, or you become an enlightened one.
The third text seems to, when it describes that the kingdom's inside and outside of, there's a logic to lead to looking at what he just said. He says here, if they say it's in the sky, then the birds will come before you, like they existed before you existed. So right off the bat, he's straight up saying, you didn't evolve from monkeys, you didn't evolve from fish, you straight up didn't. Like, that's just not what happened. So there's a second curious thing here. Well, what do you mean, you, when he says you didn't evolve from a fish? Maybe the body did, maybe, but not you. So there's always that sort of secondary, alternate, depth perception you can see with the sayings that lets you kind of triangulate, not necessarily that he's just saying something for no reason, but he's saying, here's where you are right now. Here is where I know for a fact you are trying to go. And because of how complicated reality is, because everything used to be just a bunch of spheres rolling around, bouncing off of each other, honestly, considering where we are now from then, eternal amounts of time, like there's no words you can use. There's just straight up isn't. There is, to a point where you're like, it's better to just no beginning, no end, but it says the kingdom's inside and outside of you. So what he's saying is the inside of you preceded you and came before you, and the outside of you came before you. And that puts you into a state of you're forced to believe that you are currently in the now. You're forced to. You're basically put in a superposition of the past between the inside and the outside, which is already incomprehensible, and it pushes your brain. If you look at it from a logical perspective, it pushes it in certain very specific, pathways, because it's like he just said something that's like a logically incomprehensible thing to look at. But here's the thing: if you're seeking the text, do you think you can comprehend it? Are you seeking to? There's the subtlety of that text, and why that finds the interpretation part is tricky, because it means there's one interpretation, and there's like, besides the interpretation, there's like an infinite amount of ways to not really read it correctly. There's an infinite amount, and you're never going to know exactly, but maybe you would know, because he says when you come to know yourselves, you will become known. So it's like that's the thing where even if you didn't have an angel visit you, you know for straight up you're watched. Like just straight up, oh yeah, they know about me.
At
Yeah,
some
no.
point, it clicks.
Well, that's why it said that, like, when Jesus comes back, those who are saved are supposed to have their heads held up high. They got nothing to worry about. They got nothing to hide. Like, seriously, they got nothing to hide. And if they were going to be damned, they wouldn't have the opportunity to look up for show, just to be cast down, right?
Yeah.
So that I forgot where that is, but somewhere in some of the New Testament said that those will look up high. Will when the return happens, we won't have our heads ducked down, or like our, what I mean. It'll just be like, oh, okay, hey, like treating as your neighbor,
Right.
right? Exactly. The same exact. Be like, oh, hey, cool, what's up? I don't imagine that one person would want billions of people to instantly flood them, right? I'd be chill. I'd be like, no. There's a part in scripture that says, sit at the back, don't immediately try to jump to the front. Something like that, you know what I mean? Like sit at the back of the church. Don't like sit at the front line of some place. You know what I mean? Just wait for your turn. Wait until you're called. Something like that. So I think there's a thing where you're supposed to be able to be conscious enough to be as developed of a being as he would be, which would be, there's no fire. What? There's no fire. Cool. Back. I'm very excited. That's great. Cool. But I don't want to disturb him. I don't want to there's probably a lot of other people that want to go to him, so I'm like, oh, I'll wait. There's a finite amount of people on this planet, there's a finite amount. And with the nature of time, you could probably just go hang out with your family or something while you wait. Who knows? Maybe it's something like that. Maybe, but he also said on that day, you won't ask of me anything. So it's one of those things where if you're in his presence on that, you aren't going to open you don't want to, because you don't want him to know that you don't know everything. So you're not going to ask him anything because he already basically lined it out. No, you have everything you need to figure everything out. You don't need to ask me anything. There's a certain how a high level samurai master would train his student kind of thing with that, in leading by example. He's quiet. He's just sitting there. You're just eating food. Noticing again that the only times in the scripture where Jesus stood up and started saying stuff was when people disturbed him while he was eating, right?
Well, I mean, he definitely, in some cases, he definitely said things that seem to be trying to avoid attention. And he asked people not to tell people about him healing them, for example. And he asked people not to tell people what he had done for them. But people were not very good at following that, and that's why eventually he gives the Sermon on the Mount, because he ends up being basically chased up the mountain by a bunch of followers. So yeah, people get it out of him. But I almost see a parallel in this third verse, the second half of this third verse. When you know yourselves, then you will be known. This is the maxim of Asclepius, the great healer. And Jesus Christ is also called the physician of the soul quite often. And the great healer Asclepius, he was the student of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, or Thoth, the Egyptian god Thoth. And Asclepius wrote on the wall of the temple, "Know thyself," because the greatest medicine is to have knowledge of the self, because by knowing the self, you also, being created in the image of God, have gained knowledge of God. You gain knowledge of the macrocosm. So by knowing the small man, or the microprosopis, which means the small face of God, you come to know Adam Kadmon, or the macroprosopis, or the cosmic man, who is the great God. And in doing so, you recognize yourself as children of the living Father. You recognize that you are a version of him in a diminutive sense. You are the microcosm of the macrocosmic Father. And then if you're unable to realize that, then you live in a state of spiritual poverty, and your state of being and your lack of knowledge is itself that poverty.
Darkness.
Yeah. And I think that
neither seen nor heard from.
I think in this case, actually, even the next verse, verse 4, where Jesus said, "The person old in days won't hesitate to ask a little child 7 days old about the place of life, and that person will live. For many of the first will be last and will become a single one." The person old in... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, I really want to know what you think of this one, because these first few they're kind of easy to look at, right? They're kind of like, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, as long as you can at least believe it straight up, because a lot of people, they haven't even decided if they want to use this as something to learn from. That's how far fallen people are. They're still stuck in primeval, looking at individual texts as an idol that they're supposed to defend, like they're living in a freaking video game.
Yeah.
Unconsciously at that. And you can't even say anything to them. What do you say? What do you say? You just go. The only thing is just go to them and try to reach out to them. And if they kick you out, well, what can you do? Because if they try to kick you out and you say, no, I'm not going to go, then you're basically proving what they believe in. And that's the effed up part about the patience. But with this fourth one, I definitely want to know what you think first, especially that second line.
Okay.
The second line, that's very interesting.
So this is to me, this is a clear reference that either whether it predates the Synoptic Gospels or not, this is also written in Matthew in chapter 18, and Jesus is speaking to the brethren, and at the same time, it reads in chapter 18, beginning with verse 1, "At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, the midst of the disciples, and said, Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of God. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of God. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the sea." This is my personal belief about this passage, is that this is a common theme actually in Taoism as well, where Lao Tzu is his name. Lao Tzu, the teacher who wrote the Tao Te Ching, his name means old child. Lao means old, and Tzu means child, and Lao Tzu means old child, the one who has in his old age become like an innocent child again. So little children, in my opinion, if you ask, I mean, maybe a little child who's 7 days old cannot normally talk, but if you talk to a toddler about things, about God and things, sometimes they have memories that predate their birth, and sometimes they know things that other people don't know, and so there we say the saying, "From the mouth of babes," truth comes from the mouth of babes. Truth from the mouth of babes. And
no, it is true. You can ask a 7-day-old child about your problems. You really can. You want to know why? What does the child do? Well, when you tell them about all of your important worldly woes, all of these horrible things, and you tell the kid, and he's just like, ah.
Yeah.
He's just like whatever.
Yeah.
Let's be here now. I'm right. We're here now. Let's talk now. So he goes to, the old man. He goes to ask the kid about the place of life. Like, literally imagine a guy who's 80 years old who asked, his baby grandson, "Son, how do I come back to life? How do I live? I feel like, I've been like dead my whole life," or something like that. And the baby, he just looks at him a bit, and then he just smiles and, happy at him or something. you know, and then, you know, that's fine and all. And then, or let's say he cries because, you know, and then the guy's like, oh no, he's crying, he's hungry, or let me go help him. And then he comes back to life and he lives. I think that it is literal. I think that after a certain level, you can read these texts and they become literally true. No interpretation. It's just clear as day.
Yeah.
Because you can literally ask a kid 7 days old about the place of life, and what's their response? Exactly. He's got to meet the kid halfway. He's got to put in some work and raise him up and teach him. And then he gets lost in it and he stops worrying about the worldly woes and he just goes back to, you know, living one day at a time. So first, many who are first will become last, and they will become one and the same. Previously, I thought this meant something along the lines of many people will try to rise up to become, you know, enlightened, and then they'll all be, you know, they'll all kind of just smush as a single thing. And I didn't, and you know, in hindsight, that's not true. I think it's really, well, are you the first and last of who you are? From a certain perspective, yes. From another perspective, no. So it becomes true both ways. If you believe you're not the first and the last of who you are in one way or the other, you also then observe that you and all those others are one and the same, or become one and the same. Alternatively, if you view yourself from that perspective, you're the only Lex White, so you are the first and last Lex White, and you are the one and the same. So become one is a very sensitive phrasing here, because one is supreme. One is like one of as well. So when you become one, you're one and you're also one. It's a sort of magic with linguistics that most people hearing, they're not going to really kind of grasp that I don't mean anything complicated. It's literally just the basics. But that's the other thing about seeking with this interpretation, is this person believing that the truth is not known and that they're reading this to try to obtain some complexity instead of one truth, right? Because they're already under the assumption, they've already believed since they were little that it's something that they have to, you know, figure out. It's not already available. And that's not to say people who do that are trying to become superior to the original truth, because it's written that the student is not greater than the teacher, right? There's a subtlety there, because it's not saying that the student can become greater. You can't become greater. That's like, what are you talking about? If I chop trees down for a living, and that's literally it, the single action chop a tree down, and I told you how to do it, there's no you can't get better than me. What are you talking about? What are you talking? You can't. What are you talking about? You can chop it down faster. I'm chopping it down the way that I taught you how to chop it down. That is what I mean by chopping wood. You literally can't do a better job at what I do myself. It's one of those kind of things. That's also why people get pride in the world, obviously. So it's one of those messed up things where, you know, the reason why the old man can ask the kid and he'll find life is because of forgiveness, because it happens. You get prideful or something like that.
I think that in this passage are several references to some other passages. For example, in Matthew, what you were first saying is that many people will try and few will succeed. That is based on the Matthew 20:16, where it says, "So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen." That is a kind of a surface manifestation of a clear parallel. I also think of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, for many sayings in a row, for example, it's called the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That is someone who's the last, the poor in spirit. They become the first, the kingdom of heaven. They achieve the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Someone who is mourning has something for the ability to be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And that's like saying, blessed is the empty, for the empty can become full. This is also a reference to a passage in Genesis, which is one of the passages about the true nature of human beings. In Genesis, let me see, I believe it is Genesis 2, maybe 23, and it is it's Genesis 2:24. It's right after that. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So two people who are of physical being become spiritually one through a process called the spiritual marriage or the sacred marriage. And in this context, I'm reminded of Mark 12:28, where the scholar, a scholar and scribe of the Pharisees, comes to Jesus and asks Jesus, what is the meaning of, or what is the greatest of all commandments? And Jesus, he responds with the passage, which I believe is Deuteronomy 6:4. I believe it's Deuteronomy 6:4. I'm just going to check that to make sure I'm not. Yeah, that's right. It's Deuteronomy 6:4, which in Hebrew is Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, which means, hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Lord, Yahweh is one. And this Yahweh Echad is a very strong exclamation in Hebrew, which is saying Yahweh is one. That's like as if there's an exclamation point there, saying there's Yahweh is completely one. Everything is one. And when so I believe what this is saying is many of those who are in our world, who are, let's say, mammon worshippers, or those who are following money or their false light, they are deceived by worldly gain and by worldly things. They can be first in this world. They can be among the richest. They can be among the most powerful. But those people who are first here will be last in the kingdom of heaven and will become a single one. Everyone who they wronged is actually just themselves. And so, for example, if you think about, imagine someone like Stalin or Pol Pot or Adolf Hitler or anyone who is responsible for a massive number of deaths. Even people who were leading their countries in righteousness, but many people died because of their leadership, even if they were good leaders. And many of the people that I listed, I don't consider to have been, the best of leaders, but they definitely caused many deaths. But there are good leaders who also have caused deaths, and in the sense of them being first in power, in worldly power, in the kingdom of heaven, they may suffer the most because they have been first in this life. They are going to be the ones who will suffer the most. Becoming a single one with their brothers and sisters, they will be struck by the suffering that has been caused by their actions when they were first of this world. And I think that many of the first that will be last, that is a reference to the turning on its head of things as they enter the kingdom of heaven, which is that if people could see the kingdom of heaven accurately, they would be trying to give money away, not trying to accumulate money. They would be trying to become the person with the least. They would be trying to give the most to everyone else, because they would understand the heavenly principle that what one gives to another is magnified in its goodness by many degrees. And so one is much richer by giving away $1 than by saving $1. And one is much wealthier and accumulates much more merit and much more charitable understanding over time through the process of unifying the spiritual nature of man. So I'm guessing that his microphone was not working again, so he's, let's see about restarting this. Hey, are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I was just did you miss part of what I was saying?
Probably just the last bit.
Okay, so I was relating the fact that I believe that the the people that are considered to be the first and foremost of this world, the richest, the most powerful, um, they in many cases are are the ones who are going to have a tough time transitioning to the kingdom of heaven because they may have to answer for things that will put them in a position among people that are will put them among the last. But people who are if people could see the kingdom of heaven, rather than wishing to accumulate money, they would wish to give money away, and to a dollar that is given in charity in the kingdom of heaven is much, much greater in value than the dollar that is accumulated. And so the people who are first in this world will naturally appear to be those who have accrued the greatest spiritual debt in the kingdom of heaven. That doesn't, but unless they are sincerely charitable people, good people, and so on. That's why it says many of the first will be last, because it's not necessarily that being rich will make you a bad person, but many people who have blessings in this world, their worldly blessings are not blessings that will carry over to the spiritual world in the way that they maybe expect them to. It's said, you can't take your riches with you, for example.
I think like with that, it's for the people who have a lot of riches, I think they'll be okay, and maybe it's just a learning process. I think since Jesus said specifically to the Father that he saved everyone but the evil one, maybe he meant literally, very literally everyone. Everyone, except for like one, the evil one. Now, he said the evil one. He didn't say a name. He just said the evil one. We can leave that alone for another time, though. That's an interesting topic. But with the rich, I think the Lord is also the greatest defender for these people, because in truth, Lex, these rich are in poverty, and they are that poverty. So since they never got to know themselves, right? So when they pass, I don't think they're going to get attacked by people. I think the torture happens within them of their own choice, because they're given literally everything. And then they realize that the whole time, they were wrong. And I don't think it's a process that anyone wants to have be more painful than it is. It's a tragedy. No one wants to look at that, No one wants to watch that. Maybe family members or something, you know what I mean? People who love them, or the Holy Spirit coming around to watch, something like that. I think that when the rich die, I think that it's, well, if you want to blame them, well, let's go back to the day they were born. Well, let's go look at their parents. And then you say, okay, well, it's their parents' fault. All right, let's look at their parents' day of birth. What was going on? Okay, it's their parents' fault. So it ends up at a thing where you end up just throwing people at random into prison, basically, through the attempts to try to find out what caused problems. Because there's another thing that says anyone who believes that all is deficient is deficient within themselves. And that's a tough pill to swallow. That's tough as hell, because it means that you can't, like, anything that we're seeing that we're judging as blaming the person, it's false, because it's the body's fault. The body is weak, and it has to do with the nature of reality, where the problems come from in the first place. Like, if you're not watching out, if you're not watching over a place, it's not gonna look very tidy, or very welcoming for you. It's gonna return back to nature or wilderness. But I think you are right there. I just think that, I guess maybe it's from my experiences, but I always try to lean towards, well, what they did is probably not as bad as people think, but at the same time, you got to talk about it a little. But at the same time, there's forgiveness. So it's one of those, I don't think people are going to be attacked. I think if they are, there's a scripture writing that basically says if someone comes to you accusing you, just say, be like, okay, sorry, something like that. Don't fight them. Because yeah, because, whatever, if they're wrong, and you're right, and you probably are, because no matter what happens, if someone's coming at you like that, they're not from Jesus, right? Would Peter randomly come up to people and attack them like that? Hell no. So if whoever does that, you already know for no matter what happens, whatever they're accusing you of, if it's truthful, be like, yeah, that's true. Something like that. If they try to throw you in prison, that's fine, but because, there's someone who's watching over who's going to throw them in prison and take you out and of there, and you'll get rewarded for, you know, helping that being. How is it that your meekness helped him? Simple, because you taught him by example. If that Satan is not able to make even the weakest of creatures he finds budge against what he knows that their creator how he taught them to be, then eventually he has no choice but to copy and then not be like that anymore. So there's a certain, again, that pattern of kids becoming adults kind of thing. If you look at the scripture, every time Satan interacts with God, God pretty much is like, okay, whatever you say, but I'm telling you, I'm telling you. And then it's, I told you so. You didn't listen. You know, because at the end of the day, God is the word, not necessarily. God is the word, and Satan can just choose to ignore it. But it's the wilderness, man. You ignore the instructions of the elder who knows better than you. What do you think is going to happen? And they say it's fun and games until they get their knee scratched and they're crying.
Actually, in this, what you're saying is actually kind of drawing me to open up the next verse, which is verse 5, where Jesus says, know what is in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and there is nothing buried that will not be raised. And this reminds me of Matthew 7:7. Ask and ye shall receive, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. But this is like it's saying, you know, whatever you were looking for, it is in front of you, and if you are able to interpret what is being given to you, and learn the lesson that is in front of you, then everything that is hidden from you will also be given to you with time. And this is one of my very favorite passages of the Quran is a passage where it says, everywhere you turn is the face of God, or there is the face of Allah. And this, for example, this is from Surat Al-Baqarah, meaning the cow. It's the very first. Well, it's the longest surah of the Quran, and it is the second one. And so this is 2 verse 1. It's Surah 2 verse 115, and it says, and to Allah belongs the east and the west, so wherever you might turn, there is the face of Allah. Indeed, Allah is all-encompassing and all-knowing. And this is also that there's another verse that says, Allah knows what you do. I am just paraphrasing it. Allah knows what you do because he is closer to you than your jugular vein. This idea of closeness, or that what you're looking for is right in front of you. God is always right in front of you. Is what I think. That kind of poverty. If you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are that poverty. Is saying the cure to that is in this phrase: know what is in front of your face, and what is hidden from you will be disclosed to you.
You know, that is true about even up to the last 4 ones. That's true, because if it all of the sayings, you know, every one that we're reading, you can use it and compare it to the ones above, and it gives you a lot of context in terms of what you're looking at. So when you know what's in front of your face, well, that means you're not in darkness. It's literal, just normal, like what we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. All right, I see air. Even if I don't see it, I see it. It's right in front of me. You know, how could I not see the air? Obviously, right? So which way did I mean when I said see? And no matter which way I meant it, am I any less accurate linguistically with my usage of the word see? So that's also, again, back to why you need 2 ears. You know, there's that you have to meet the person halfway. It's you are one, and then there's others that are one. right? You're both one, but you're both one of one. Conceptually, it's some people when they hear that they don't comprehend it because they think it's something different from what they already know intuitively. That's the thing. A lot of the truth of these passages matches what we already know intuitively since childhood, and that's kind of something that's kind of hard to accept in a way because it means that something happened. There's like some sort of blot in everything in this world, right? That's sort of like it's transient. It's like a knot in traffic almost, that darkness we go through where we lose ourselves, then we rediscover, right? That kind of pattern that happens. And a lot of people, they aren't able to do that. They don't know themselves. And it's also because they're attacked, but that's a different topic. But knowing what's in front of your face and what's hidden from you will be disclosed to you because, there wouldn't be anything hidden from you if you know what's in front of your face. There wouldn't be anything hidden. It would just be whatever is in front of your face. So it also says what's in front of your face. It doesn't say know what is behind your face, know what is behind your head, know what is all around you. It doesn't say that. It says know what is in front of your face. It focuses on intuitive, physical, what you already have. And it focuses on, it's supposed to be like a really good, direct, purposeful, but the other problem is, again, whoever discovers the interpretation. So a lot of people, when they read this text, they're going to have to wade through their own brain because their own brain is going to keep them from properly, well, as it just says, know what's in front of your face. What's the text saying? Like, it's even literally telling you by saying that to you. What's this text saying? Know what's in front of your face. What's in front of your face right now? The text. Who wrote the text? There's all of that, know what's in front of your face. And so right now, we sit here and we're talking about it, but there's a certain air of it's kind of sort of hidden about all of this, right? But I would say it's not, but of course trying to teach that to someone else, no matter who, that's difficult because no matter, you can't make them do the work. You can't do the work for them. You can, and they're saved, but they're still going to be like a baby. You know what I mean? Like in the kingdom of heaven, they're going to be the poor, the poverty, babies, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but they're going to keep crying and they're going to keep on yelling and they're going to be happy, but they're also going to have times where they cry until they eventually they know what's in front of their face. So it's that cyclic nature that the Buddhism typically goes into, and why it happens when you pass is because your mind, how you become infantile when you're really old. How most people do.
Yes.
Imagine that times 1 billion when you die.
Right.
And eventually you just become nothing but a crying baby, and there's nothing wrong with that. People love babies, Lex.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I definitely think that there's truth to that cyclical nature. And for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, a very common thing to say is that death is like a very, 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 very heavy sleep. And so Tibetan Buddhist monks will practice a type of sleep yoga or dream yoga in which they try to maintain awareness and consciousness as they fall asleep and maintain consciousness and awareness all through the process of being asleep. So they maintain an entire lucidity through that whole thing. And the idea is that trains them, that then when they go through the much, much deeper sleep of death, they will be able to maintain conscious awareness. And in doing so, they will not taste death. They will essentially never fall asleep and then lose their memories. They will maintain a continuity of consciousness that will allow them to continue as some kind of greater being. And this is sometimes called, attaining this is sometimes called achieving the rainbow body or attaining the rainbow body. And it's people who achieve this are said to be able to dissolve their physical body into pure light and leave behind only the fingernails and the hair, which are dead.
Yeah.
It's an interesting...
I think that, yeah. I think that with that, I kind of see that as that's one way that you could do it, I guess. That's one way you could do it. they're talking about how it makes you into superior being, and I'm like, the Christ teachings don't claim to be superior teachings. It doesn't claim to be superior. It just is, but it doesn't claim to be. But it might not be. It might be equal, and that's the point, because everything's from the single dimensional quantum foam, which is flat. That's why everything that goes up goes down. That's universal law. It's why anyone who's exalted gets unexalted. Anyone who's humbled gets shot up. If you go down, you go up. You go up, you do go down. That's why it's better to come from above, so that physics. You go back up like a spring. Versus if you believe you're from below, well, this means you believe you're currently above right now, and then you're going to go below. But with that passing into dreams while conscious, that's almost an oxymoron. Because the whole purpose of that dreaming is your philosopher's stone of your conscious state of being becoming like a particle smoke with spin, right? It just is, right? Because our consciousness can take the form of anything in this universe conceptually, anything, and that includes what the conscious experience of particles is. And most particles don't have a discrete location, right? And their location is transient, just as ours is. As above, so below, right? You can use all physical laws to metaphorically translate scriptural text too, and back and forth.
Yeah, that's it's definitely in this sense. Just because, for the sake of time, there's some. I would like for us to get through at least the first 10 or 12 sayings. Right now we're at about an hour and 42 minutes. And but I see that this next passage, his disciples asked him and said to him, "Do you want us to fast? How should we pray? Should we give to charity? What diet should we observe?" This is them asking.
Before you say what Jesus said back, I want you to psychologically analyze that. Why would people ask those questions?
Right. Yeah.
What kind of answers do they expect? Why are they asking those questions?
They're asking Jesus for very specific instructions. They're asking him to hold their hand through the process. They're saying, like, what is the recipe?
They're also assuming that he wants them to fast. They're assuming he wants them to pray, or what they think of as praying. They assume he wants them to just give to charity. They assume he wants them to give. They assume he wants to give them a specific physical diet.
Right.
Something that, at least initially when I read this for the first time, that's what I saw. I saw, how do you want us to fast? I mean, we already decided we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. We know that's the right thing to do. Okay, don't tell me how to raise my kid. I'm going to tell my kid, don't you eat for 40 days in a row every half year. Yeah. And at, you know what I mean, at some point that might be pointless. There's stuff like that. They're torturing themselves. They're making their time be eaten up. Look at his reply, right?
I think that in this context, his disciples are doing precisely what was normal at that time for people who were Jews or of living in Israel or in that place in the Holy Land at that time. The teachings of the Torah, for example, are a very detailed law of how do you do things. How do you fast? How do you pray? How do you give to charity properly? What's the proper things to eat? And so they expect answers from Jesus that are like the answers that Moses gave. And in some sense, the Pharisees in the Synoptic Gospels come to Jesus and they test him by asking him things, in trying to get him to say something contrary to the Gospels or to the Torah. And the thing is that Jesus does not teach anything contrary to the Torah, but he teaches a new manifestation for a different zodiac age. So Moses' teaching was for the age of Taurus, the age of Aries. He overthrew the age of Taurus, and that secretly was ruled by Scorpio, which then was seen as a serpent. And so Moses cast down his staff when it turns into a serpent, showing that he has power over the inner sorcery, the esoteric school of the Egyptians. And then he stops sacrificing bulls and destroys the golden bull that the Israelites have made as their false idol, showing that he has power over the exoteric school of the Egyptians, which is the bull worship or bull sacrifice in the river Nile. They would drown an Apian bull. And instead, he institutes the sacrifice of rams in the Passover sacrifice, the sacrifice of a lamb or a ram. And in the Holy of Holies, they sacrifice rams very often as sin offerings. And and in that sense, he establishes an exoteric school, which is about the sin offerings and the burnt offerings that they offer in the temple. And then he establishes an esoteric school, which is Libra, the scales, which is the symbol of the law. So he establishes a law. When Jesus comes, he overturns the exoteric school by becoming the lamb himself, sacrificed on the cross. And so there's no need for people to sacrifice rams in the temple any longer, because Jesus has taken the place of that sacrifice. And through the miracle of the loaves and the fish, has shown that he sustains the people now, as opposed to the burnt offerings that are given in the temple. And then in the case of the esoteric school, which is marked by the Virgin Mary and the virgin birth, the esoteric school, Jesus overthrows the esoteric school of the scales of Moses by overturning the scales of the money changers in the temple, showing that Jesus has power in his Father's temple to throw out the old way and to usher in a new way. And so Jesus is teaching the exact same gospel, but he's ushering in a new format of it for a different one of the zodiac ages. And his establishment of this, when they come to question him, they're questioning him about these laws to see if he would change the law. But Jesus' response to them is a very simple response and very practical. And Jesus said, don't lie. Don't do what you hate, because all things are disclosed before heaven. This is a saying, don't lie in your heart by doing a practice that you don't believe in, and don't do a thing that you consider to be hateful as part of your practice, because heaven knows in what intention you do something. And so if you do it without understanding what you are doing by sacrificing, what you're doing by fasting or praying or giving to charity or having a special diet, then before heaven it has no real merit. And I was just going to finish what he was saying, that after all, there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and there is nothing covered up which will remain undisclosed. So he's saying that they cannot hide their deeds from heaven, and so they cannot try to weasel their way out of doing things properly by saying, like, well, the old law said fast this way, but we want to ask you again, how should we fast? Because we're hoping that you will give us something different. or we intend for you to give us a different law.
Well, they also their consciousness wasn't all the way formed in a way just because they already had an assumption that they were this one way and that they weren't going to change or wouldn't listen, right? And they wanted to fast, they wanted to pray, they wanted to do these things in exchange or something like that at some level. And it's also to, what their fathers are doing, what the community is doing. There's a complicated social aspect here as well to keep in mind. It's also why typically in the kingdom, it's that lonely factor. Yeah. But he doesn't even comment on any of that. He's like, well, whatever. Just stop asking me these questions, whatever. First of all, just don't lie, just straight up. There you go. Don't lie, there's your diet. Don't lie. How should you pray? Don't lie. How do you want me to fast or not eat food? Don't lie. How should I give to charity? Don't lie. That's how you're going to give to the charity. So how do you feel about the charity people? Do you want your money or do you want to give it to them? Are you lying to yourself? So he says everything in just that first little part. Don't lie.
True.
Like to all of it. Because you don't lie to him. Do you want to give to charity? Do or don't you? No one's going to push it on you to. But if you sit there and a guy's asking for money and you feel bad about it, there's two things you could do about it. You can give him $1, or you could use your money to make changes in his city so that he doesn't have to sit there like that anymore. There's a few different ways to go about, charity. Mm-hmm. So so when they're trying to ask for specific instructions, he wants to raise them up like him. What was his experience when he birthed? He was just, oh, here's this book. Oh, here's all these people. Okay. But and don't do what you hate, right? So he supported it from the first one. Don't lie, don't do what you hate to lie. If you want to give to charity, and you don't, you're going to hate that. So do what you want. I'm not going to tell you if you should or shouldn't. That's your judgment, because it also says don't give alms to the poor, right? And that's a thing. I do give change to people sometimes, but only if I don't believe they're spiritually poor. Because if I give it to them and they're spiritually poor, my giving them money is like me saying, I don't want to talk to you.
Or,
here, F off.
It could, in a certain sense, be like, here, I don't want to actually help you. I just want to give you, I want you to stop talking to me. So.
Like the people who donate like $1 million a year to charities that they know nothing about. So the money basically went into a freaking black hole of mismanagement anyways. So a lot of rich people giving to charity doesn't really do a lot. Mm-hmm. Or at least not as much as they might think. It's because there's a certain point where you have so much money, you can't look at it or manage it yourself, and you don't have anyone reliable enough to do it for you, so that a lot of things fall apart like that. But what about the next one?
That's actually, and yeah, I agree with you very much that basically don't lie, don't do what you hate is his answer to all of those questions, which is to say, don't do something that is not genuine. Don't practice don't do any of these spiritual practices that you don't understand and are not doing genuinely, because you're not gaining a benefit from it, because heaven knows what intention was in your heart. So if you give to charity in order to be seen by other people as being someone who gives to charity, then God gives you the reward of that, which is that other people see you, and that is the saying in the same book of Matthew. It will say that he has his reward. Someone who does that has his reward by being considered a charitable person by other people. But if you give,
I think,
in truth and anonymously, or if you give in truth with a true heart, wanting to give something, wanting to fast for real, wanting to pray and actually communicate with the Father, if you do those things sincerely, then you will benefit. And I think that is a good instruction for all spiritual practice, is to not do things that you don't have your heart in, or that your intention doesn't match. Don't do things with ulterior motive, for example.
A lot of that has to just do with, just to finish that, just with the time you put in. Mm-hmm. That's all. That's really what it's about. A lot of the time is the time you put in. Although, of course, if you just sit there praying, just giving your time in silence, well, okay, cool. You've decided you care. Now what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to sit here and pray. Okay, but what are you going to actually do? Oh, I'm going to sit here and pray. Okay, man, but what are you going to do about it? Right? So it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where, with giving change to the poor, giving anything, how much time are you giving them? I could care less about what a person's doing with the money. I care about, what are you doing with your time? What are you spending your time on? If you genuinely repented, you're going to be spending almost 24/7 trying to figure out what the hell's going on with things,
That's right.
You'd be spending that amount of time in your mind, and it's going to be very visible before heaven. It might not be before the world, because you're also taught not to put everything up on a pedestal either, not to just shout every little victory you have or whatever to people, because it's back to what you said, you got your reward kind of thing.
That's right.
So that's kind of messed up for me, because I don't really want an eternal, permanent reward for trying to help figuring anything out. I'm just kind of like, I'm a little bit pissed off at things in the world, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm really sure that I fully have the authority to do something about this, But even the concept of that's a big kind of decision thing, man. That you need so much help. You need to hear so many people's testimony to figure out where to go and what to do.
Absolutely.
And what can you help with? Where can you help? It's a big responsibility that, although a lot of rich people go through hell to get the riches, it kills them basically, and it's something that they wouldn't really understand because they don't understand the concept of willingly putting in virtually 24/7 amount of time into like not just thought but thinking, not just prayer but thinking, which is like prayer with action. You're thinking about, okay, you're learning, right? What should I say? Where should I say what I should say? But Jesus Christ also did say, you should rely on the Holy Spirit, which is to say that, worst case scenario, somewhere inside of you, you got the perfect words for whatever's going on right now, somewhere inside.
That's true.
And it's just going to be given to you. But and by using the thinking process too much, you can kind of block that by filtering too much, like questioning.
Absolutely. And then, you were looking on to this next one, number 7, which is one of I consider it to be an extremely profound statement that I think about a lot, where Jesus says, "Lucky is the lion that the human will eat, so that the lion becomes human, and foul is the human that the lion will eat, and the lion still will become human."
It took a while for me to I kind of understood exactly what it meant the first time I read it. I just straight up understood it. I didn't like it though. I didn't like it. I did not like what I understood. So, but I ended up comprehending some sort of, not exactly a middle ground, but it says here, good is the lion the human eats and the lion becomes human. So it's not that the lion stops existing. Right. So it's not as though, you know what I mean? When you were first birthed into this world, you were taught in pure ways that nature exists. If you want to have a family, it's fine. That's what your body was made to be able to do, But if that's all you are, right, then, the lion thing. So I think that it's a balance. I think it's that, when you come into the world, it's like, the body's overwhelming. So, that controls a lot. And so, that's like the lion. So you as the spirit have to like contain the body, contain your desires, contain all, just like how your consciousness is you as a single center. And then you have like a bunch of pals that make up your whole being that, that just like hanging around you. And that's kind of the eternal thing with the kingdom, is you could just keep building up more and more and more and more. Believe me, what's already here on this earth, though, don't even think about having more ever for eternity. That's how much stuff is here. That's what kind of treasure is on this earth right now.
So this is, I want to give my thoughts for this by relating it to one of my favorite poems by the Islamic poet Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, he's also called Mevlana in Turkey. He had a poem called "I Died as a Mineral," and this is the translation as translated in the book The Mystics of Islam from 1914 by Reynold Nicholson. And it says, "I died as a mineral and became a plant. I died as a plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed, but even from angelhood I must pass on. All except God doth perish. When I have sacrificed my angel soul, I shall become what no mind ever conceived. Oh, let me not exist, for non-existence proclaims in organ tones, to him we shall return." So I think about this statement as being kind of a statement of this kind of process of progression, of the lesser growing into the greater. And so the greater, it is good for the lion to be consumed by a human, because in doing so, the human has elevated that lion to becoming to a human level of consciousness. And it is difficult for the human who is consumed by a lion because for a while he will be lowered to that lion's level of consciousness.
Whoa, wait,
But
what if that's because when you pass, and what if that's because when you pass, you know everything that you ate, and you, out of the kindness of your own heart, you vote, or you ask the Virgin Spirit or the Holy Spirit to uplift them to your level, just so that you can apologize or something like that. What if it was something that innocent and childlike? I think that would be kind of cool, at least.
I think
If that was
actually
why that happened.
you're not so far off base with that, because a very famous story about Buddha was that before Buddha was, I believe, even before he was a student of the Buddha Dipankara, which was the Buddha before Gautama Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, before he was ever Siddhartha Gautama, was a monk in the forest, and a hungry, vicious tiger came to him in the forest, and the tiger was ravenous, and Buddha had such compassion on that tiger that he let the tiger eat him so that the tiger might live, and in doing so, the karma of his compassion and his compassionate act and sacrifice to the tiger, it brought him to be his reincarnation before the Buddha Dipankara, where he was able to learn at the feet of a Buddha. The idea is that when we act compassionately, we can elevate beings that have not gotten as much progress by us, by feeding them. And we can also elevate the things that we consume by bringing them up to our level. And I think that
You take from them and you give to them in exchange, or
Right.
you select them, something like that, and they're used to that law. Like that's literally where they're from. They're like, oh shoot, I got eaten. Oh well, yeah, whatever. That happens. I'm cycling 1.5 billion animal life. Whatever, dude, whatever. I don't care. Oh, you want me to elevate? Geez, gosh, I didn't. Okay, gosh, what lion's gonna say no to that?
that
What?
is definitely the case. I think with I think about this often in terms of for my own practice. I eat meat very sparingly, but I sometimes am resistant to fully committing to a diet of vegetarianism or veganism, so that when I'm eating with other people, I'm able to accept animal foods that they offer me, because I believe that when, for example, the Native Americans believe that if you were to hunt a deer, first, before you go hunting, you should pray, and you should pray and ask God to give you a deer to feed your family. And so you want the spirit to give you a gift, and you pray and give thanks to the deer, and the arrow finds the deer, and the deer sacrifices itself to you. And you have to sit then with this wounded deer and look it in the eyes and sit and hold it close to you, so and as its life is fading, and whisper words of thanks to it in its ear, because you then will take the flesh of that animal and honor its sacrifice by using that to sustain your life and using it as a nutrient to sustain the lives of your family, which then elevates that deer and makes it part of you and makes it part of your family and part of your lives, so that you can use those nutrients in a positive way. And that becomes a positive way to consume meat. But the lion, where it says foul is the human that the lion will eat, if you look on it as just as slaughtering cows and things like that, the wholesale slaughter of animals that are suffering, they become foul to you, because you not only put them through suffering, but you lower your own vibration by consuming their suffering. And so,
Dude, that's so true, because because of this whole thing that's been happening recently, a lot of livestock are getting literally dumped into giant piles and then lit on fire.
Right.
Did you know that?
I do.
Lit
Yeah.
on fire.
That's with the, for example, the swine flu in China.
Yeah. Something's happening that's forcing everyone to slow the hell down. For some reason, I don't know, for me, I can kind of see exactly why it would be for a good reason. You know, everyone's freaking out, but I'm like, yeah, no. Yeah, this is coming, and it's going to happen every 100 years unless something changes. It happened 100 years ago, man. We had a disease and stuff. But what does it even really mean? Like from a very, let's just for a moment of high level, in the concepts of ultimate reality, where nothing can harm anything else, what does it mean to eat something else? Why is that something that animals just accept? I mean, they fight it, they do everything, you know, they fight it, but they accept it, and their consciousness leaves pretty quickly. I don't think they really suffer too much, you know, besides the torture we typically put them through with experiments, you know, but, you know,
I think
it's interesting because the Buddha, with letting the lion eat him, it's like he saw him as nothing less than an equal. He's like, hey, looks like you're having a bad time, buddy. You know, I think you'll be thankful after this. Because somewhere, dude, that lion had its course changed in its cycling. And eventually, through eternal time, then it poofed. And then it remembered all of that times, and then remembered, this is my starting point. This guy, what happened to him?
That's absolutely
right. And then he'll search for him. You know, that's why you do good deeds, it'll come around. Someone will come find you.
One of the I'm going to put this image up on the video. One of the ancient images that is about this topic is the image of the Ouroboros, or the serpent that eats its own tail. In this sense, it is a symbol that the universe this is considered to be the universal serpent, the serpent Typhon or Tiamat, through that Marduk created the universe out of. This is an ancient Sumerian myth. But the Ouroboros is a symbol that in order for something to be alive, it must consume things that are also alive. Life consumes life in order to perpetuate itself. And in that sense, if all things are one, all things are like a serpent that is eating its own tail. Buddha saw the tiger not as something separate than himself, but as being his equal, or being of the same ultimate substance as he himself was. And in that sense, he realized the Ouroboros, which is, he realized that the serpent eating him was no different than him eating the serpent. And therefore, he was willing to sacrifice himself to the serpent, or to the tiger. In this case, he was willing to sacrifice himself to the tiger because he knew that it was no different than the tiger sacrificing itself to him. And I think that this is the same kind of idea that Jesus is teaching here in the Gospel of Thomas.
With the Ouroboros, it's interesting because the Ouroboros is not a perfect circle, is it? Like, I mean, literally, it's not drawn as a single perfect circle, right?
Right. I mean, it has in a sense, it tapers.
Well, I think that thing, okay, so that doesn't represent ultimate reality. That's the purpose of why there's an above and a below. It has to do with locations 1 and 2. That Ouroboros is a perspective of this place. I think that okay, so let's say a spirit forms into a man, which forms the world with that man, because there's nowhere for him to walk, right? Otherwise. So he gets old, he gets tired, he's like, this place is great, because that's what spirits do. They travel, right? They go from place to place. They have family, but they travel. That's also why it's the traveling, tribe of Israel,
Right.
There's a certain echoes with that, and why you have to lose attachment, move on. People pass away. They just moved on, they went to a better place. That's the assumption. It's a joke. You're like, oh, they probably went to this place they thought was a better place. So they're going to what may or may not be another better place. There's only one place, which is, the great place, and that's to recognize every place where you go. You know what I mean? It's like the re-entering into the kingdom is internal. But sorry, I sidetracked there for a moment.
But in that
so that guy gets old. He leaves, but he had 2 kids, which means he formed 2 new bodies through which more spirits come through and form. And they're like, oh, what's going on here? Now their starting point is his starting point plus theirs. They know that they're not at his starting point, but the whole place, it's still new. It's like, holy cow, it's even more infinitely new for them, because it's not just a whole world that would exist wherever they went. It's someone else's. And so it's 2 layers of like deepness to them, and that goes on and on and on, and things get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you have the fact that solid objects exist and pain exists, because apparently, there's, with the infinity of bodies, there's like a, you can feel it if you can't move somewhere, because it's like, if you keep on trying to go in a set direction and your body says you can't, and you're hitting a wall as a particle, and you just sit there, you're dead, right? You have to know that, but what if you don't want to accept it? And so that's where pain comes from. Have you ever considered how incomprehensible describing pain is? Like, what the hell is that? I can describe feeling. I can describe the fact that if something's really cold at the touch, it feels hot to me for just a moment.
That's right.
I'm not sure if you've ever experienced that. Like, if you touched dry ice, it's cold, and then it feels hot, and then I'm like, wait a minute, what the hell? Is this cold or is this hot? And it introduces a certain thing with your nervous system, and I think pain is the experience of something missing. That's the only way I could describe it. If your nerves aren't receiving information, it's something like that. So, because it's like the physical sensation of the unknown, if that makes sense. Because normally your body is always sending you information. You feel everything, Sorry.
That is related to Heraclitus's idea of enantiodromia, which means a thing runs to its opposite. If a thing becomes so much to one extreme, it will wrap around and run to the opposite extreme. So if a thing is really, really cold, it will feel almost as if it's hot. A thing can become so motionless that it ends up being full of motion. What if
that's the actual nature of the Ouroboros, and it's not actually just things eating each other? I think that the concept of Ouroboros as eating its own tail, honestly, I'm not a super giant fan of it. I don't know a better representation, to be honest with you. I don't. But I think at the least it needs a lot of context, because otherwise people just believe that, satanic and everything is animalistic, you know what I mean, that kind of thing. So they think to copy what they see in the Ouroboros.
I think that it's a symbol. It is a very accurate symbol, and I love it very much. But my thinking is that there's an inner way to see it. There's a way that you see it when you're trapped inside of it, and there's a way that you see it when you're outside of it. And so when you're inside of it, you see it as the wheel of samsara that's constantly turning, and it seems like an endless loop, or a vicious cycle, a cycle that's always self-perpetuating. And you say, why does it continue? Why is it eternal? Why does it keep eating itself? Why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Why do we keep beating ourselves up against this wall? But if you see the wheel from outside, you can see that the rotation of the wheel isn't meaningless. It actually moves a wheel forward upon a plane. It moves the wheel forward on the ground. So the cycle of the Ouroboros is not one that stays in the same place eternally. It's not a circle that is eternal. It's like a spiral or a helix. Or you could say it's like the motion of a wheel that is rolling upon the ground, where it gains distance as it is rolling across. So the cycle, even though it repeats, it doesn't actually, it's not the trap that it at first appears to be.
It's like spirals moving in space. It's spiraling, but it's also moving somewhere different. Right. It's spinning, but it's also moving forward. That's it. It's essentially a physical, fundamental thing.
That is true.
So I agree with you there. From the outside, it doesn't, from the inside, you're right. It looks like it's infinite. It looks like a massive cycle. From the outside, it's really just a matter of, oh, these guys are still just bumping, going like 10 million miles an hour if they hit the left side of the room, going to the right direction. And then as soon as they hit the right side of the wall, 2 seconds later, they're shooting back twice the speed, and they keep increasing their speed instead of realizing that they're physically feeling where they are, and they need to slow down and just go to the middle. And then if they sit, then they can hear, they can listen. The energy is calmer. They're at the ground state. They're able to just rest for a moment, and then kind of just be like, well, I have all the time in the world right now.
I definitely think,
And eventually, they'll eventually decide to go somewhere else after resting. But,
I think
that inside Samsara is that experience of pinball machine. And on the outside, it's hilarious. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Why are you No, stop. No, what are you doing? Stop going. It's like when you watch someone on a video game stream and they're screwing up and you don't understand why. You're like, no.
Well, it's funny. I think that that when it comes to like the progress that is there,
mankind has a very bad habit of that, going all the way to one side or all the way to the other.
Right.
That's what we're having right now.
We think a lot in terms of polarity and extremes, but I think that Buddha and also Jesus, they taught moderation and and as Pythagoras did, as I was saying yesterday, moderation in all things, even moderation, and even a excess of virtue can become a vice. What that means is that the middle way is like
pride.
Is like the Goldilocks zone. And if we think about the Goldilocks zone in terms of astronomy, that means the Earth has life on it because it's in a very particular middle ground of not being too hot, not being too cold, not being too bright, not being too dark, not having too much mass, not too much gravity, not too little gravity. It has all of those middle things. And so life really occurs in between two poles. And this is the quantum superposition of the one and the zero that's become so interesting with quantum computing recently. Is that all of the universe can kind of be seen as, is it one or is it zero? And in some sense, it is both of them at once, superimposed. And so the gradient of all possible values between 0 and 1 is actually an infinite gradient, because there's an infinite amount of information that exists between 0 and 1. For example, if you have a number like 1 divided by pi, that will be a number that's less than 1, greater than 0, but is an infinite string of decimals that never ever repeats. And that irrational nature will contain, eventually, in an infinite space, it will contain all possible information. So these two extremes, we have a habit of bouncing back and forth between these two extremes as like a sine wave. And everything in the universe vibrates, and everything moves between two poles. But life truly happens in the middle, in the superposition of those two things, or in the movement between. And that is what Heraclitus was talking about with his idea of enantiodromia, or of a thing that moves to its opposite. We're constantly in the state of bouncing back and forth between opposites. And if we're trapped in a small perspective, we see it as like being trapped on a roller coaster, and we're like, we're going up, and it causes anxiety. We're going down, it causes anxiety. But if we see the whole process of moving back and forth, we see this beautiful wave that is structured in such a way that we're always moving up and down in a bobbing motion or in a vibrating motion that has a rhythm, and it has a frequency, it has a wavelength, and it has a certain value of expression that is tied to its motion between two poles. So that is exactly what I'm talking about as a thing rolls forward. In fact, I am going to bring up a little picture of a sine wave circle animation because as a sine wave moves, and let me see if I have this picture that I'm bringing up here, and I'm just going to make sure that it's showing up on my, I guess it's not showing up. I guess my thing is not following my things properly.
The funny thing about the 0 and 1, or 0 versus 1, is it 0 or is it 1? The solution, it's like when you were 1, and then 2, it's 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Which is funny because that also adds up to 3. But that, I think, number theory, fundamental number theory, I think that is definitely something that we should definitely get into, especially at some point, because the concept of where the numbers came from is a topic that you are not going to find anywhere. You ain't going to find it on the internet. You won't find it in scripture. No one talks about it. It's something that, I don't know, maybe it's all of the knowledge up until now, the pattern became clear, and it was actually from reading this text that helped me with that, because it mentioned 1 and 2, and I'm like, what do you mean? What are you saying? And you're using 2 basic words that I'm supposed to already comprehend out of elementary school, and I have no idea what the heck you just said.
Oh yeah.
Right, so it's essentially, in the next video we're gonna start off with the 11th one, and that's the wake up. I think that's like the wake up call of the entire thing. It asks you a direct question, like straight up a question. Right. And the others up to that point, I don't think that his answer was literally a question. He didn't ask any questions up until that point. But since your thing, Phil, what do you think of?
Oh, it did. It actually
the
did
7th one. Okay, the 7th one. Yes, go ahead.
So it just shows a cycle of a circle and how drawing a circle creates a sine wave. But the animation will be in the video. As I was switching over, it just swapped over to my other Chromium tab, so it showed my Facebook for a minute, and then I was like, oh, what is going on with this? So anyway, the
other thing with the number 7th before the 8th, the number 7th one, 7 days.
Yeah.
It previously said in the 4th one, the man old in age will not hesitate to ask a small child 7 days old. And I don't skip over any amount of even accidental encoding because of the numbers thing. It said there, consuming has to do with the cycle, right?
Right.
And look at that. It's number 7. What a coincidence. And look at the shape of the number 7. It's an arrow, it's a corner, it's a box corner, it's a compass.
An angle.
It's a clock. You can look at it as a long hand, and there's a million things you could I mean, if you're a bit morbid, you could see a hangman, but whatever. I don't see it as that.
That I think it's very interesting. I mean, I think that you're right. There's no accidents when it comes to the numerology of these things.
And it's not like we were dumb when we made the numbers. It's not like they weren't thinking. They were just trusting the spirit. They were just writing what made the most sense. They're like, that makes the most sense. Because 1 also has 3 forms, right? Yeah. It's either a straight line pointing up and down, a straight line with a base, and a line representing a box shape, right? If you look at it from an angle, it's like a 3D box. And the third way is just without a base, up, and then the line, which looks kind of like a 7, but most people don't draw it like that.
Yeah. So, I see what you're saying. I don't want to feel like we are rushing, but I do want to
wrap with number 8
within a little while, and so within the next 20 minutes or so. So these next few are very important and beautiful, and
they go together, really.
And why don't we read the 3 of them together and then discuss them as kind of a group? So
okay. And he said,
yeah, go ahead and read them.
Okay. And he said, the man is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea and drew it up from the sea full of small fish. Among them, the wise fisherman found a fine large fish, He threw away all the small fish back into the sea and chose the large fish without difficulty. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. So it's to say, like, let him hear the ninth one.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said, now the sower went out. Almost as though it's after that point. Now the sower went out, took a handful of seeds, and scattered them. Some fell on the road. The birds came and gathered them up. Others fell on the rock, did not take root in the soil, and did not produce ears. And others fell on thorns. They choked the seeds, and worms ate them. And others fell on the good soil, and it produced good fruit. It bore 60 per measure, and 120 per measure. And number 10, Jesus said, I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I am guarding it until it blazes. There's a lot with number theory if we look at the ninth one, there's a couple things with number theory to look at, but go ahead.
So these passages are also ones that are found, they are parallel to those found in the canonical Gospels, as most things in the Gospel of Thomas are. And the person like a wise fisherman who casts up his net, or casts his net into the sea and draws up a net of little fish, it reminds me of the parable of the pearl of great price, that a pearl salesman or a pearl merchant had many pearls in his life, good ones, big ones, small ones, but finding the single pearl of great price, he gave up all that he had to purchase it, and then that he clung to that one. So this is saying that when the wise fisherman discovered a fine large fish, he threw all the little fish back into the sea and easily chose instead the large fish. My first thought is that this is the counsel that what is of great spiritual value is of greater value than any of the small things of the world. So it's greater than any, the small fish you could think of as being as like money, or being like, he could sell them at the market. Why didn't he keep them? But he chose a single large fish because he chose sustenance to feed his family, and he chose something wise in keeping the ecology intact of the sea. He threw back all the little fish because he knew that they would grow back into being great fish. And he chose the large fish as the one that was ripe for harvest and took it to feed his family. And just like this, we see the parable of the sower. When the parable of the sower, as if he's casting back all of these little fish as if they're seeds. He went out, took a handful of seeds and scattered them. Some of those fish, or some of these seeds, will fall on the road, and they'll be eaten by larger fish, or as these seeds are said, will be eaten by birds. Some will fall on the rocks and they won't grow very large. Their potential will not be met, and they won't produce a head of grain. They won't eventually feed someone, a family. Others fell on thorns that were choked out by bad circumstances, but some of them fell on good soil and produced a good crop and yielded a great measure of abundance. And so Jesus then goes on to say, I have cast fire upon the world, and look, I am guarding it until it blazes. He's saying as though he is the fisherman now who has caught the big fish, and he understands. And so he's casting the little fish back into the world. He made his apostles, for example, fishers of men, which is to say that they were collectors of men, or they caught men and brought them into the teachings. And so Jesus got what was necessary for himself, and then tossed back the rest in teaching to the world. And that's what he's doing here now, teaching us. And in doing so, he is reseeding the world. He's allowing putting the seeds out there so that they will grow, and the ecology of the fish pond or the sea will yield many more fish according to the conditions that they are raised in. And so it is like he has cast a fire upon the world, fire being a symbol of the life force energy, something that grows like a living thing without any help from humans. If you cast fire upon something, fire will spread naturally. Just like if you cast grass seeds out into a field, they'll grow. And so Jesus is saying his time on the earth, he is cast fire onto the world, but while the fire is small, or while the seedlings are small, he is guarding them until they can take root for themselves, and then he will go on his way. And that is exactly what we see Jesus do. He plants the seed for the next generation, and he helps them be nourished in the apostles, and he shows them the power of the resurrection, and he returns to teach them, and eventually he ascends and returns into the heavens from whence he came. And I noted in my lecture on Pythagoras last night that both Pythagoras and Jesus are seen as being relations to the sun god, or the god Apollo, or the son of God. And the sun is that living fire which casts life upon the world. And so Jesus, the Son of God, descends on the world and casts life into the world. He stayed in the world as Jesus Christ long enough to guard that fire so that it would take spiritual root in the souls of men. And then he left for a time to let it grow. Just like in the parable of the wheat and the tares, the seeds are allowed to grow until the time for harvest, and until the time is ripe to come back and take those people into heaven with him, or to harvest them and bring them into the Father's storehouse, which is to say, to bring them into the congregation, into the kingdom of God. What do you think about these passages?
Well, it is pretty clear that there's an order after 7 to 10, and I think it's very interesting how, like, my gosh, the level of genius, and
Absolutely.
it's like he didn't even have to try. He just did it. It just was him, and so number 9 corresponds to 6 and 3, but it primarily corresponds to number 3, interestingly enough. It oh gosh, I made a mistake in which one I was going to talk about next, but looking at number 8 is the one I want to talk about first. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, on number 3 it says, when you come to know that yourselves, then you will become known. So he's saying there's a net currently cast everywhere right now. Mm-hmm. Do you believe you're caught? Congratulations. See, maybe it's just like that, It's like, hey, whoever, I'm just chilling. It's a dude sitting in a boat, Lex. He's sitting there. He's just sitting there, right?
Yes.
He's just sitting there waiting, patiently, with wanting to have, obviously, like you said, with the large fish, he takes that one. He throws the small fish back in the sea. And, there's a lot that can happen with the one large fish, What can you do with one large fish? You could choose to eat it, but you could preserve it in like a thing so it stays alive. You put it into an aquarium or something like that. Or what if you transfer the big fish into another pond because you want lots of big fish in that pond? There's like a million different things that you could do with one large fish.
I think that is true. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of depth to all these parables. I think that's why he gave them in parables and not in layman's terms. You could say the parable can have much more depth of meaning.
With number 9, the single thing that stands out is the last part: 60 per measure and 100 and 20 per measure. I find it interesting when it's written like that, rather than to say, because these people back then, they didn't treat 120 like a generic thing. It was it was almost like a function. It had a distinct meaning because they had mastery. I tell you, they must have had mastery, 100% understanding of what each number meant from 1 to 10, but for the purpose of language, communication. Because like 10's 10, 9 is 9. Of course, when you get into fundamental math theory, it kind of all melts into one, and so you look at two as two things, two sets of two sets, which means there's a function which is infinite but visible, and a function which is infinite but not visible, which corresponds with the function which is visible. And don't try to think about that. It's one of those slippery snake oil kind of things. You by definition of it, there's that component you can't touch, but it's there because it's also surrounded by the things you can touch. It's basically like empty space. So even one transcends the concept of, space itself, But anyway, with number 9, 60 per measure and 120 per measure. Now, did he say? Now, here's the thing. He said and, right? He said and. 120 plus 60 is 180. 1 plus 8 is 9. 9 plus 0 is 0. So 9 is 9 is sort of a function for, I guess, the best selection that's winding up always, and it's not 10. It's not like a ground base.
Right.
It's like a root coming out of the ground. Actually, it's like a plant growing out of the ground. Number 6 is like a root, right? And those are the only two numbers that are typically written with curves, with the exception of 2, because 2 is just a weird MFer that is basically pretty transcendental on its own, because like I said, there's an infinite seen part and an infinite non-seen part, which you see with trees. The roots in trees go way below what you see as the earth. There's electromagnetism things going on there. The fact they absorb light all the time, so there's kind of some, like the interconnectedness with all the rest of nature, yes, that all trees are, And
I definitely think that people who are listening to this, if they're not familiar with the numerology that we're talking about, I did just go over it last night on the Secret Teachings of All Ages, Chapter 10, The Life and Philosophy of Pythagoras, where I went into the Pythagorean school's views about the different numbers. And we will go into it more tomorrow in my lecture on the mathematics of Pythagoras. So this is all stuff that we do talk about regularly, and we have talked about. And so if it's confusing to you what we're talking about numerology here, I would say that you should go and do that. I would say that the number 9 definitely refers to the completion of a set. The numbers are 0 through 9 in truth, and 10 is not a new number, but the return of 1, the first set, to 0.
Well, that's like quantum collapse. That's like kind of like how every day that you look outside to see the plant that's growing, like with the number 9, it's currently is complete. There's a finite built completeness that's made up of all the infinity it's got so far. But tomorrow it's going to be a little bit bigger or a little bit different. The next day it'll keep being bigger, a little bit different, but it's still, it's still completed enough to be visible. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You can, no matter whether it's small or big to you, since it's your plant, it's perfect. It's perfect every day. It gets bigger. It's perfect. It's not more or less perfect. It's just perfect every day. With number 10, the last one, with casting fire, you were right about the seed thing, with throwing, although maybe a better term might be casting embers, throwing embers. Although at the same time, it's interesting because fire, fire people see as destructive for life, but I don't know, what if the world is primordial right now in spirit, and it hasn't actually developed any mountains yet, it's just a big ball of sea. So if I threw fire at it, right, there's volcanoes now, lava, explosion, action, activity, things happening. Things are happening. They're not just sitting there anymore. They're fighting, but they're fighting to live. They're living. Doesn't look pretty, but it depends on how you see it. But it's going. And now look, there's land. So there's fire. right? And now there's land. Because when he says upon the world, does he mean like throwing fire upon a solid dry object, right? So when it's written as the world, and when we're supposed to interpret the meaning, well, what's everything that he could be possibly saying, and what thing is he probably, that's definitely the thing he's saying, and he said he's guarding it until it blazes. And with blazes, I don't think that that's something that's going to burn the world. I think that burning the world would be the same as flooding it. You're flooding it with fire. He didn't say, I have flooded the world with fire. I've cast fire upon the world. Cast fire, he didn't say how much. However, it can be assumed to be a certain amount, which in metaphorical terms means an ambiguous amount. But in literal terms, it means a decided certain amount. He is certain about the amount. It has been measured, a process. It was thought about. He observed it. He said, okay, I'm going to throw exactly this amount here.
Right.
I'm gonna cast this on the world, and I'm gonna wait until it blazes. So when it blazes into like a big forest fire, maybe there was a lot of, without the trees meaning to, maybe they were all growing into each other in a knot, and a lot of plants and trees were dying, suffocating, like a blood clot with a heart or something. So he cast fire, it cleared out the clots, a lot of trees got burned, but the tops of the trees you see above the soil don't matter, Lex, right? It's all the groundwork, roots that are permanent. That information the tree develops and sends down is permanent. In a way, the tree never dies because of that. You could burn it down. You could try to dig up all the soil, but the information traveled to the other plants. In some way, at a quantum level, it's never going to die. It passed on its information every day, and it's still there. It's going to pop up somewhere else, like reincarnation. So I think, like, even if a forest burns, that's not the last you've seen of it.
Right.
And maybe it's for a purpose why you would burn a forest for or something like that. But he didn't even say he was going to burn a forest. He just said he's guarding it until it blazes. So it's curious, because obviously the 10th verse is the part where he basically forces you to think about it metaphorically. He's just saying, no, I know the other ones, I said it in this certain way, but I just used the word fire. And then you have to ask yourself, well, shoot, what the heck is fire? And then you have to, it's like, it's solid, but it's not.
Right.
It has the attribute of solid only by the fact that you don't want to be near it for too long. It repels you. But it's not solid. Is it liquid? Well, I mean, it seems to form around whatever it's in, kind of. Like if you see fire in outer space, it's like a circle. And you can sort of shape fire, like if you put it in like a candle in a bottle, and maybe if you let it blaze, it's still contained in the cup. It's like volatile water, Yeah. It's still contained, though. It's not spilling out of the cup. You can affect the shape of it. You're not going to exactly be able to control the shape. That's another point. How do you control the shape of fire? Like, you kind of can't. You can't really control the shape of water either. You can make it look like a different shape, though, right?
Yeah.
Like if you pump fire through a tube or water through a tube, you can make it look. So there's all these different parts to like.
I think that definitely what I see in it has something to do with the fire is like the life force energy. It is the energy of heat, and in the tarot, the suit of wands is the symbol of fire, but it is also the symbol of life and the growing things. Fire is a symbol of life because it's the heat that comes from the sun. The sun radiates heat and creates light, and the light and the heat give life to the world. The earth's womb receives the light of the sun and is impregnated by it in a certain sense. And the Son, being Jesus, the Son of God, casts fire upon the world, casts heat upon the world, and he's guarding it until it gains fruit. It blazes. It takes. It is able to act of itself, or it's able to be self-existent. And in this case, I think that Jesus is actually parallel to in many cases, he's parallel to the ancient god Enki, who is the god of wisdom and water, and also who is also called the god Dagon, the fish god. And the Pope wears a mitre on his head that is actually the shape of the fish mouth of Dagon. And the ancient priests of Dagon would wear this fish mitre on their heads, and the Pope still wears it today. And I think that it is a symbol of Jesus, as Jesus is Pisces, the fish. And the word fish in Greek, ichthys, is actually a acronym for Jesu Christo Theo Ios Soter, which means Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. And in this case, Jesus parallels Enki, who is also related to the Greek myth of Prometheus. Prometheus is the one who gives fire to the world, gives fire to human beings, gives them technology, and gives them understanding through fire. Unfortunately, I started talking there because your microphone cut out. So I'm just going to reconnect to this. And are you able to speak now, or can I hear you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can hear you again. So I just want to
before. Yeah, I mean, you didn't interrupt me or anything. I finished what I said about the fire for the most part.
Okay.
The only other link I would say is, you remember how it said that people will be cleansed by a sea of fire? Mm-hmm. Well, let's imagine a sea of fire. Let's say that a lot of people are using mental projection to think about this, and they see, oh my gosh, how horrible, a sea of fire. And I'm like, well, I mean, fire is not actually that hot all the time. Like, you have to be like right on it to get burned, Mm-hmm. You have to be right there. You have to be basically impeding on its physical space to get burned by it,
Yeah.
I mean, or be directly above it. But that might be a metaphor somewhere, though. You have to be right there for it to burn. So a sea of fire, what if that's like a fire that you can feel and it's really, really spread out? There would still be a center that's the hottest. And what if that's like the light for some people? So I think that when they're cleansed by it, it's really like, what do you do when you look at fire at a campsite? You stop. You can't look at the fire in your phone at the same time. What are you doing? Stop recording it. What the fuck is wrong with you? Stop recording it. Just look at it. I'm just saying, because a lot of people, they'll sit there and they'll get their phone out instead of just stopping. The point is to stop. Like, it cleanses you because it's a warm, it's an enveloping sea of warmth, a heated sea. How hot is it? Well, I mean, I guess fire is hot, but I take some pretty hot showers. If I was already feeling hot, fire might not feel that much hotter. It might not burn people to a crisp as they believe, because, hey, it's a sea of fire. So how are you going to burn to ash if it's water at the same time? How are you supposed to, it's supposed to even you out. But, I think that has to do with a lot of how it's translated and written. Because if I look at both translations for number 10, they both say the same exact thing word for word. They're like, oh, yeah, no, there's no confusion. This is what he said. He straight up, that's what he meant. That's definitely what he said. But it's kind of like how the sea of fire, no matter how you write it, if the person only has one ear, it'll go in one ear, out the other.
Right.
And they're just going to see one way, fire.
The very last...
They won't see fire and wonder. Sorry.
No problem. But just, I want to... This is my closing thought about this. The very last book of the Old Testament is the book of Malachi. And the book of Malachi gives a very specific prophecy which foretells the coming of Jesus. And it's a very important book. But I brought it up here on stream. And it is Malachi 3, verses 1 through 6. And this verse reads, Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord, whom ye seek, shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. And who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap, and he shall sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. And he shall purify the sons of Levi, and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer unto the Lord an offering in righteousness. Then shall the offering of Judah and Jerusalem be pleasant unto the Lord, as in the days of old, and as in former years. And I will come near to you in judgment, near to you to judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, and against the adulterers, and against false swearers, and against those that oppress the hirelings in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, and turn aside the stranger from his right. And fear not, saith the Lord of hosts, for I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed as if by the fire. And this is very, very clearly to me the culmination of what Jesus is saying here. I have cast fire upon the world, and look, I am guarding it until it blazes. The fire he's speaking of is the refiner's fire, the fire that refines or purifies gold and silver. So it purifies the heart, which is gold, and the soul, which is said to be silver. And in this sense, it parallels this alchemical idea of the alchemist's great work is to transform lead, that is heavy, mundane material, into gold. That is, he transforms through this refiner's fire the gold or the silver or the material, the worthless or heavy lead, which is very dense, and he purifies it into valuable gold. And I believe that is the true esoteric meaning of fire in this context. And now I'm reaching the end of our broadcast. We're right about 2 hours and 52 minutes, so we're approaching the 3-hour mark. And do you have any closing thoughts for our viewers?
Well, I appreciate everyone who, anyone listening or who eventually does listen. With these texts, it was quite a lot to even start to get into these, just because there's so much. It's context. It's a singularity. We have to look at everything around it, and it's just going to get more esoteric the further down we go. It's just more and more. So it's going to be very interesting. And there's also going to be more about number theory too, because there's a lot more mentioning of that. This text, it's funny because it's supposed to be before all the others. So I don't think that they were made necessarily using this one, because it's just his disciples who made it. But but it's just definitely going to get more complicated. Or in ways simple, but I don't know. Just the first 10 here, they are something else to go through. Really, they really all are, and it's a good thing. We got you here because you have a lot of the context. A lot of the scripture that lines up with all of this and relates to it. And we also have a lot of, nowadays with technology increasing and philosophy increasing, we're approaching a point where we can just straight up verify that the text is 100% truth. Although I fear that by the time that happens, it'll, that would be like the lowest caste, if you will, spiritually. The ones that they couldn't see until they couldn't believe until it was proven scientifically. Oh, the scripture was right all along. Looks like we should have considered climate change a little more, something like that.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is great work that we're doing here to try to explain all these things to people, because it is very difficult subject matter, very dense texts, very esoteric language, and I appreciate you spending your time with me, Sean, ATma, to spend this time with us and our community to study and better ourselves in our understanding of the universe and our understanding of the divine. So thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your night.
Yes, thank you for having me.
No problem. Right now, I'm just going to end us with a little prayer, and then the stream will be over for tonight. But our next stream will probably be next week. Sometime next week, we'll continue with the Gospel of Thomas. Tomorrow is going to be Pythagoras and the mathematics of the Pythagorean school. It's chapter 11 of the Secret Teachings of All Ages. And on Friday, I will have our good friends Ian and Dave on to discuss entheogenic substances and entity contact. So then later this weekend, we will have Pitch back for part 2 of his piece on the UFO phenomenon and whether it is a disinformation campaign or some kind of intelligence campaign, or what the real kernel of truth is. So because we've been working on the language of Jesus today, I think I'll just close with the words of the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, oh, hallowed be thy name. Thy will be done, thy kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, I think that it's very important for us to consider the words of the Lord's Prayer in these things. The give us our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses as we have forgiven those who trespass against us. And bring us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory. Amen. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Thank you very much.